Pathfinder in Season 6 was a success for Voyager, so it was inevitable that a sequel would be created. We had Lifeline, of course, but even though Barkley and Troi both appeared, that wasn't their story. It was the Doctor's, with them guest starring in it. No, Pathfinder was Barkley's tale, with Troi providing him with advice, and that's what I'm referring to when I talk about Pathfinder and a sequel. Not the existence of Pathfinder being in the show, after all. It's part of the developing storyline, and frankly, that's welcome. Hell, any development on Voyager was welcome. With the obvious exception of any holodeck storyline, that can just piss right off. It starts out with word that the monthly data streams have been hitting a bit of a hiccup. Seems that last month's delivery never arrived, and this month's is stuck in the transceiver, with Harry needing to go down there with a plunger to sort it out. With Tom making clear that any further failure will result in some hideous fate, like being demoted to assistant chef and chief listener of Neelix discussing his lice problems, Harry learns from Seven the reason for this problem. There's a hologram in there. Yes, as I just mentioned, we've already had the Season 6 episode of Lifeline, wherein the Doctor transmitted his program through the Midas Array back to the Alpha Quadrant, and obviously came back again later on. Yet starting now and throughout the episode, everyone forgets that and acts as if sending a hologram through the system is something unprecedented. Like I think Harry is here to deal with this situation. Can you tell this man has been an ensign for 6 years? Despite fucking up their systems, Harry manages to get the hologram to the holodeck, whatever the problem was. Wouldn't surprise me if there was a bend in the cable and the hologram was stuck. Anyway, it finally appears and is revealed to be none other than a recreation of Reg Barkley. This isn't just some vanity project, though. Starfleet sent him themselves. In fact, he closes out the teaser by announcing that they'll soon be seeing their loved ones face to face. So, it's another one of those episodes. After the titles, Herb, that's my name for him. In order to distinguish him from the actual Reg Barkley, I call him Herb. Holographic entity Reg Barkley. Herb explains that there's a red giant coming up, and so the plan is that here and in the Alpha Quadrant, special tech bullshit will happen, allowing them to create a gateway between the 2 points so that Voyager can pass through it and get home. Janeway's not loving this plan. They'd already explored the possibilities and determined quickly that it would kill them all, and it's not much of a rescue if you don't make it home alive. But Herb says that they have shield upgrades and medical treatments that will allow them to survive the trip. Everything is taken care of. And I guess that's the end of the discussion, because the only thing left to talk about is the fact that Herb is confined to the holodeck. That's right, no consideration of anything else. It's just, oh, okay then, I guess we'll do that. Why, of course I'll just follow your plan we've never heard a whisper about before this moment, with nothing to back it up but your pre-programmed response. And I understand you can get me a great deal on the Brooklyn Bridge, too. Jackass. Someone reprogrammed this thing to swap his head and his butt. It's obvious he's talking out of his ass anyway. For a moment, take Reg Barkley out of the equation here. If this plot line were to come up, what would you expect to happen in such an episode? They would get a transmission, right? They would have some message from Admiral Paris ahead of time, rather than some snake oil selling hologram saying what me worry at them. He would explain the procedure. He would show footage and share data of previous tests and the results of simulations to the point where he feels that it's safe to proceed. Because after all, if this fails, Admiral Paris is killing his own son. I'd like to think that he's going to err a little bit on the side of caution. After doing all of that, he would then say that if she feels comfortable after looking over the data, making the decision as captain to attempt this, they'll be ready for it. That all sounds like what you would get in a typical Voyager episode about getting home, right? It doesn't sound like they would just go along with some dismissive, oh, we've thought of everything. And that's all the answer that we need here. If Janeway were a tenth as smart as the creators of Voyager want to pretend that she is, She would know there's no reason to speed things along and just take a leap of faith when a month or two extra would ensure that they didn't meet a disastrous end. She knows this, and she knows that they know this. So why would she be so quick to just say, "Oh, your word's good enough for me, person that I have known all of 3 minutes"? Look, all I'm saying is, when I write Janeway, she's a mad, despotic genius. And when the Voyager staff writes her, it's even money that she's going to act like she just fell off the turnip truck. I mean, yeah, okay, sometimes I might write Janeway as the gullible idiot that they are presenting here, but at least you know I'm joking. I'm not presenting Janeway Gump as if it was serious.
Reg has prepared a list of assignments. I expect you to give him your full cooperation.
I absolutely endorse this plan I know nothing about. So Reg gives out assignments.
Is there anything I can do, Reg?
Yeah, Starfleet has a few thousand potatoes that need peeling, Hedgehog. What's hilarious about all of this is that the one person we see that is skeptical about this is Tom Paris. Yes, add to his already impressive list of skills, genre savvy. He knows these things never end well, no matter what Herb's speech about them being the miracle ship might have implied. But Harry is absolutely sold on this and will not take a long list of failure as a reason to think this might not go perfectly. Meanwhile, Seven is showing some Borg techniques that might be of help to Herb, who is impressed. He also takes time to discuss with her how important a symbol she is back home as someone who has escaped the collective, that everyone is going to want to meet her, especially the 12 to 18 male demographic. Back at the Pathfinder project, Reg is trying to figure out what happened. He shows Pete that the data stream dissipated in exactly the same spot that it did last month. Pete's theory is that the problem wasn't any kind of interference, but the fact that a hologram is just too complex to send, which again, they've done it before, in both directions, and was something a lot more complicated than Herb. Remember, the Doctor's a self-aware entity. Herb certainly wouldn't be. But like I said, everyone seems to have forgotten about that incident. That's the reason you shouldn't assume that something has been stricken from the canon when later Trek contradicts it. Never ascribe to retcon that which can equally be explained by incompetence. Forgetting about this thus allows us to repeat the idea of Pathfinder, with Pete as the reasonable but disagreeing boss, to Reg's gut instinct savant-like genius. Pete says that if both times it was tried it failed, it suggests that the hologram is the problem, not some mysterious interference. So we're going to forget about holograms and go back to what we were doing before we gummed everything up with a simulacrum shaped like you, Reg. Besides, this is a serious matter. We've developed cutting-edge technology that allows us to communicate across the galaxy. This isn't just helpful for Voyager. This is a groundbreaking option that can be tactically invaluable. We have to ensure this thing is handled with the utmost care. Now, send in the next group of small children to begin poking about the place. While Pete is giving the kids a tour, Reg interrupts screaming about the Borg, convinced that a ship that came within 20 meters of the Midas array belonged to them. While it's more likely the Borg would assimilate the array rather than a holographic mailman, Pete's dismissal of 20 meters is more ridiculous. I mean, 20 meters in space terms is the equivalent of shoulder-checking someone. Instead, Pete tells Barkley to take some time off, and he agrees to a little vacation, in a way that makes clear he will not be doing anything vacation-related, even by Reg standards. Back on Voyager, the Doctor calls Herb to sickbay since, as you saw, he's using the mobile emitter, and the Doctor is stuck right now. But as much as being confined is irritating, what's bothering him far more is that the new treatments are clearly not going to be enough to protect the crew. Herb tries to put his mind at ease that the treatment is supposed to work in conjunction with the shield modifications, but the Doctor still seems uncomfortable. Well, the actual Barkley had become a friend of his, though, so in light of that, he is inclined to give the hologram the benefit of the doubt. But, well, more on this point in a minute. They finally managed to get the transceiver fixed after Harry broke it, So they send back a reply along with Herb's progress report, except we now see who is behind this, the Ferengi. For any who had been missing their presence in Star Trek, I hope you're proud of yourself. They're interested in Seven, but not for the reason that you might be thinking. Not that their leering comments show that you'd be far off. But what they're interested in are her nanoprobes. They're extremely valuable, worth enough to liquefy the crew of Voyager to get it. Although that is a pretty low figure now that I think about it. That's, Can anybody break a 10? We catch up with Reg, who shows up delivering drinks to Troi while she's on vacation. I take back some of what I said about doing the typical vacation stuff. Big hat and a nose covered in zinc oxide, that's exactly what I'd expect Reg to do on vacation.
Do you have any idea how inappropriate it is to follow your therapist on vacation?
I like Reg, but even I have to admit he's probably been asked questions like that before. She agrees to listen to him and finally points out how different he seems today compared to the last time that they met, when he was singing and telling jokes at Geordi's party. He said it was because, at the time, his life was going so well. Pathfinder was chugging along, his hologram had just been finished, and he had a girlfriend. But then he lost her and the hologram at the same time. And after all the time that she spent listening to him talk about his work at Pathfinder. Troi points out the reason he's grasping about desperately for someone to blame is probably because deep down he knows that Leosa is probably involved. Listening to Barkley go on does take a special kind of woman, the kind that doesn't vanish without leaving a forwarding address. Speaking of which, we get to the scene that makes me cringe, where everyone is gathered in the mess hall, watching Herb do an impression of Janeway bitching about scrambled eggs. Alas, it's a comedy scene that I have come to expect from a show that gave us a bird named Wren as the epitome of humor. And it's made all the worse by the looping being just awful here. And this highlights what they could have been doing instead of what they actually do, which is to have the crew all have their doubts about this plan, but Herb befriending them all so that they're willing to see past it. This is a con, after all, so him being the confidence artist would have fit. Instead, his behavior seems random, which one might argue is intentional to show the shoddy reprogramming, but that doesn't seem to fit in either. And it still makes their willingness, after 6 years of disappointments, to so easily swallow this hard to accept. Even Tom Paris's skepticism is kind of silly. He thinks that it won't work, but doesn't seem worried about the most likely outcome, them being liquefied. Failure is always defaulted to nothing worse than being disappointed, so all he expects is that they won't arrive in the Alpha Quadrant, rather than they will arrive in the Alpha Quadrant, but as nothing more than a particularly stubborn stain. Meanwhile, Admiral Paris has had Leosa brought in, and she has "I am slime" printed on every word that comes out of her mouth. She badmouths poor Reg right in front of him, but denies Paris's accusation that she was gathering info for the Ferengi. Troi finally asks to have a private conversation with the suspect, where she points out that her empathic abilities tell her Leosa is lying. And while she can't have her arrested, she can have Leosa held for psychiatric examination, although being a manipulative heartbreaker is probably not something you can easily cure. So she agrees to show them where the Ferengi ship is, although she doesn't know why the Ferengi would be interested in the hologram. Though she does mention the nanoprobes in private to Barkley. It gets him thinking. So while everyone else is acting like the job is finished, the Carolina is on its way to pick up the Ferengi ship, Reg fears that they're up to something that will harm Voyager before it can get there. But until he has something more concrete, he knows better keep quiet. Leosa has helped restore some of his tattered reputation, but it's hard to unring the bell when you've been screaming Borg in front of small children. You might have wondered when I said that he should be conning the crew despite their doubts. Didn't I just tell you the doctor had doubts and Herb charmed them away? Well, that was undone by Herb then acting almost psychotic towards him when the doctor confronted him about monopolizing his mobile emitter for frivolous activities. Enough to make the doctor persuade Janeway to run a diagnostic on Herb to make sure that he's not malfunctioning. But it turns up nothing. Because, of course, he's not malfunctioning. He's just programmed for evil. There is a difference. Being a mass murderer truly is not a bug, but a feature. The Ferengi open the geodesic fold on their side, which gives Reg the missing piece of how they're going to get the nanoprobes. So he quickly explains the problem, backed up by the telemetry about the other side that the Ferengi are now receiving, which shows that Voyager is about to fly into the fold. Whether or not the Carolina gets there in time is irrelevant, because it doesn't have the technology to close the fold. The only thing that can avert disaster is the Ferengi ship or Voyager. Which means the only thing that can avert the disaster is the Ferengi ship. To get them to do it, Reg impersonates his own hologram, warning about a vengeful Janeway storming through to destroy them, which they believe because it is an all too plausible outcome. So they start closing the fold, but Herb knocked out 7 earlier, and so tries to get them both into an escape pod to fly through there before it closes. But no, they're beamed back before passing through. But once again, it means that Voyager has failed to get home, although they don't know that they were all nearly killed. So we see a somewhat dejected Harry in the mess hall. No, somewhat dejected is kind of underselling it. He looks like a man whose very soul has been shattered. So Tom and B'Elanna decides now's a good time to tell him that Janeway has a secret plan that will likely get them home in a week.
Are you serious?
You were right about him.
Yeesh, at least let the scar over his heart scab over before you rip the wound open. Oh, this is the kind of behavior that gives birth to spree killers. It's honestly a surprise that this ship didn't coast into Earth orbit with the crew all phasered to death and Harry's body in the captain's chair covered in Joker makeup. Post-episode follow-up? Stupid Neelix moment is the very idea that Neelix's morale officer skills would be necessary when the crew is told that they're finally going home. That is like making sure you're properly hydrated before you jump into a lake. Final score for Inside Man is 5 out of 10. Plot to get home? Don't get them home, just sung in a different key. The weird thing is the Pathfinder stuff is the strong part of the episode. It's the material that's set on Voyager that's weak and poorly thought out. It's almost as if they felt the diminished involvement of Voyager and Pathfinder necessitated sorting this out with something to keep the Voyager crew busy rather than giving something actually worthwhile to see this week. If I didn't know any better, I'd think their entire point was to say Star Trek would be much better off if we set it anywhere but here.
All hail